Hello, New Style readers. My name is Igor Piskov, and today we will be talking to Francis Segelman, also known as Lady Petchey. She is a phenomenal artist, and over her career, she sculpted people from all walks of life, but quite notably, many celebrities and members of the royal family, up to and including Her Majesty the Queen. So, she will be joining us shortly over Zoom. Francis, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to go through your kind of sculpting journey from the beginning. How did you begin?
Oh my gosh, how did I begin? Well, I had a very artistic upbringing. My father was a musician and my mother was an artist. So I think it's definitely in the genes. And I just always loved art passionately, sculpted or in drawing all the time. And that's really the beginning of, how I started my life.
I'm wondering if there's a specific work that you remember made a big impact in your youth?
Yes, I did actually. When I was at school, we were asked to draw Roman structures, sort of Roman sculptures. And I did a great big gateway or a drawing of Roman sculptures. And as I was doing it, I realized that it was just unbelievable. I didn't realize then, but I felt like I was doing sculpture. And I always remembered that. And that drew me to doing sculpture, really.
So, what was your first work that you were commissioned for? What was your first as a working sculptor?
It was for Harrods I think it was 1993. I was asked to do sculpture for their Egyptian room. They were making a new amazing Egyptian room at Harrods, and they asked me to do a sculpture of Sir Francis Drake. And that was the first one. So that was very exciting.
So as an artist, what was that experience in terms of that work coming into the public eye? Because I understand now each one of your works has an immense amount of fanfare as it's kind of shown, or even as it's created, as we'll get to in a second.
It was interesting for me because having to research about Sir Francis Drake when there was not two paintings the same of him, which was really strange. So in the end, I decided to really more or less do Michelangelo's David's face on it with a Sir Francis Drake collar with lace and curly hair for the Times. And it sort of worked, and it was for an exhibition on discoveries from around the world they had. And that was on display there, which was lovely.
So this is your first commissioned sculpture. You didn't have the ability to have that person sit in front of you. As you said, you had to get quite creative.
Yeah.
So who was the first to sit for you?
Well, I've had various people I've known in my life that sat for me, and musicians. I did a selection of musicians for a friend of mine for a commission. I was asked by a local vicar who was running an art centre in North London, and he asked me if I would sculpt him in front of a lot of people at the centre. Oh. And I said, no, I can't do that. I've never done this before. I am self-taught, as you know, and I had done quite a lot of sculpture by then. But anyway, I gave in the end, and I sculpted him. He's a really, really, really charismatic character, quite extraordinary character. So he drew probably hundreds of people into this hall, and I didn't realize I was going to be able to finish that in 2 hours, but I did. And it was exactly like him, and I didn't have to touch it afterwards. So it was quite incredible, really.
That is amazing. And it's actually later in my questions that I get to this 2-hour sculpt. It's a phenomenon that I have not observed in any other artist personally. And I was wondering, is this 2-hour thing, so it started as you've just described, and it's become kind of practice for you. Do you find, in conversations with other sculptors, perhaps, if this is at all standard to sculpt that quickly? It blew my mind.
It's really, really mad work, and I don't know of anybody that does it, but it's quite bizarre. You see what happened after that particular day. I just said to myself, well, I'm never going to be able to do this again. It's just too incredible. And so I decided to test myself. And so I arranged to be in a situation again where I would have a big crowd of people for a charity. And I sculpted the local mayor of the area. And I thought to myself, if I can do this again, it will be amazing. And I managed to do it again in 2 hours. And then I just carried on doing this. Okay. So what happened in that process when I was doing this 2-hour sculpture, I realized that I had to keep my thoughts positive all the way through the 2 hours. And every single time my thoughts turned to be negative, the sculpture wasn't working out.
Oh, wow.
And so I was nervous, very nervous, and big crowds of people there. And I knew that, you know, it wasn't going right unless every single thought was positive. And then that's what I loved so much, you know. When it was finished and it was perfect again, I thought, oh my God, you know, if we could really keep our thoughts positive all day, it would be amazing what we could produce.
That's a wonderful message. I mean, that can apply to really any kind of facet of life, and that's so lovely.
Yeah.
So essentially, this kind of 2-hour process was a little bit forged in fire, because you went through this kind of nervous patch in the middle of it, but through that you kind of realized its value. So being a self-trained artist, what are some of the kind of the advantages and disadvantages?
The advantages perhaps are that I didn't know about all the other things I could do, and I just focused on that because that's something that I was good at. And then again, the disadvantages were, or maybe still are, I'm not sure, that I didn't learn different techniques and different materials. I just focused on the one thing, which was clay, terracotta clay, which is the medium I love working in. And then it goes into bronze.
That's what I wanted to go into, I think, with a little bit more detail, the kind of the technical process of it. What's the very first step? How do you prepare to sculpt someone?
Okay, so as soon as I accept a sitting with somebody, I like to meet them, and I like to chat to them for half an hour, not about sculpture, just about anything, just for them to relax and for me to just get to know them a little bit, to see how their head sits on their bodies, and, you know, just, I don't know what it is, I just get into them somehow in that half an hour chat, and it brings out the character in the sculpture. And then all I have is a wooden stand with a wooden support in the middle with a bit of wire, and I have my bag of clay, and I start by putting clay on, and I use calipers, and I measure everything. So I measure backwards and forwards from the person that's sitting back to my sculpture. I measure every little bit. I measure their noses and their mouths and every single thing. And then if I'm doing a larger than life-size bust, I have a pair of calipers that make that larger. And also I get, you know, while I'm doing the sculpture, they're talking to me, which is not always easy for me because I can't concentrate, but nevertheless, it gives me more knowledge about them, which comes out into the sculpture.
I'd imagine so. You end up with their kind of life story written on their face through your fingers, so to speak.
What the difference is, actually, I'll just tell you that there's two types of things I do. I do these 2-hour sculptures, as you know, and we plan this through a charity, and then I have a very well-known celebrity to sit. The charity gets a wonderful evening because lots of people come to watch. But in that situation, where I'm doing a 2-hour sitting, I will meet them first and have a drink with them, a coffee with them. But during the 2 hours, they can't talk at all, and I can't talk to anybody else. So I have a room full of people drinking, eating, talking, but nobody speaks to the sitter or myself. And it's just, I have to get into a very, very unusual sort of zone to do this.
You get very, very serious in that moment.
Yeah. And then when I have a commission at home in my studio, or I go to a palace to do the royals, I'm doing a 1 1/4 life size, and that can take me forever. So it's so unusual, the difference. It's quite phenomenal.
So why the choice to pick that very specific ratio?
Well, sometimes people just want to have a larger bust.
You've mentioned that when you have this kind of pre-sculpting conversation, that some of that feeds into the sculpture, of course. But do you feel like that is an unconscious process, or are there things from that conversation that you take into the sculpt and think about actively?
Not consciously, no.
So it's not a case of, say, someone sitting for your sculpture and asking you to say, maybe take it easy on my nose, maybe keep my ears on the smaller side. Has that ever happened?
No, it hasn't actually, strangely enough. The only thing that might have been mentioned is hair, but,
Oh,
you know, very rarely. People actually don't really say that.
oh, so what do people say about hair?
Well, mostly ladies. You know, when I've sculpted ladies, they'll say, oh, I prefer it a bit longer and a bit fuller. But,
Right.
you know, with men, I don't have that. They probably haven't got any hair.
Yeah, that's even better. This is a little bit of a side question, actually. I saw on your list of people you've sculpted a character called Mr. Motivator.
Oh, God, yes. That was such a long time ago.
Well, yeah, it was on the lower end of the list. You know, it was earlier in the timeline. It took me on this little research trip to find out who he was and just how much of an impact he made. And I've noticed that for ladies, certainly, that you will include details such as jewelry within the sculpture itself, necklaces and earrings, things like that. And you mentioned that for men, they don't really mind how you handle their hair. But I know Mr. Motivator had a baseball cap, and I couldn't find a picture.
Yes, that's right.
Was it part of the sculpture?
Yeah, that was how he sat, you know, so that's how I did it. I mean, when I sculpted Dame Edna Everage, I don't know if you're familiar with her, she's the impersonator. You know, I sculpted her and she's adorned with loads of jewellery, you know, glasses and earrings and necklace and everything.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to pull up those images.
Yes, definitely Dame Edna.
Dame Edna, fantastic. So how was your session at Buckingham Palace?
Oh, amazing.
How was that different from your typical sitting?
Oh, it was very nerve-wracking. The first time I went was to sculpt the Duke of Edinburgh, and previously to the sitting, you were invited to go to see the room and learn about the etiquette and where you'll be sitting, etc. And so it was very, very nerve-wracking. And I had 4 sittings there with Duke of Edinburgh. The first one, I was extremely nervous, but then I sort of got used to it, really. And each artist has to take the work with them. You can't leave it in the palace in between sessions. So I had to take the sculpture back to my studio each time and then back to the palace. Oh,
gosh. And each time it comes back a little bit more fully formed. Was there any kind of feedback throughout the process?
Sort of, really. There was actually at the beginning, because my husband had actually said to me he said, oh, I'm so sick of seeing all these boring sculptures without smiles. Why don't you do the Duke of Edinburgh with a smile and make him look quite happy? And when I was doing that, I was speaking to the Duke of Edinburgh saying, I'm going to sculpt you with a slight smile. And he said, oh, definitely not. I don't like sculptures like that. So that was the first feedback. And then he was chatting all the time about, well, not all the time, but about carriage racing, which I hadn't read up on, and Kandinsky, the artist, which I hadn't read up on. So by the time I did my second sitting, I knew about those things.
Which is just another added benefit, a surprise perk to sculpting a member of the royal family.
Yes.
So Francis, could you tell me what sculpting Her Majesty the Queen was like?
It was in the same room that I sculpted the Duke of Edinburgh, and the same thing, I went beforehand to find out about how, the etiquette, and also to choose which tiara and jewellery that would be preferred for the sitting, which was absolutely mind-blowing to be faced with these beautiful tiaras. And so the first sitting, I think that was the most nervous I've ever been in my life, because I was actually having to go backwards and forwards and measure the Queen's head with the calipers.
God, oh my God, that's just coming together in my head, the calipers. Oh my God. That must have been surreal.
Oh. Yeah, it was really surreal. I still can't believe it. And then I would go back. My idea was that I was going to, because it was a 1 1/4, my idea was I was going to go back each time I measured her to a piece of paper I had on a table and write it down. measure it and write it down. But it didn't work like that because I was so nervous. Every time I went to the table, the calipers had moved. So on the first sitting, I just decided, this is so unusual. I'm just going to enjoy this, and I'm just going to do as much as I can without, being in too much of a panic.
As we have learned from your first 2-hour session, that a little bit of fear, a little bit of kind of living on the edge is very much part of your flavor.
Yes, it is, definitely.
So the tiara selection, what kind of factored into your choice?
It seemed to be my choice. I can't actually remember it completely. I got it all written somewhere. But yes, there was a lady there called Angela Kelly, who is who's the personal equerry to Her Majesty the Queen. She actually designs all her clothes now. But she's such a lovely lady, and she was there asking me which jewellery, and it was absolutely mind-blowing, to actually think that I'm choosing the tiara that the Queen's going to have.
So, are there facial features that you enjoy sculpting more than others?
Not really. It's all quite tricky. It's just getting a look, and it's so subtle. And if you just slightly get the measurements wrong, it doesn't work. So each part is quite complicated. I might say that the hair I find difficult on ladies. If they've got, like, for instance, when I did Joan Collins, who sat about a few years ago in front of a big audience of people, and she was very, very uneasy about sitting still. So this 2-hour sitting I was getting very frustrated. The hair, she has a massive hairdo. So I ended up I was throwing this clay on the hair in the end, just throwing it on to get enough hair on there. So I think the hair on ladies it takes a lot longer than I would like.
Right, I can imagine the kind of gravity that hairstylists put up with is quite different to hefty clay.
Yeah.
Just to jump back a little bit on the technicals. So you mentioned that terracotta clay.
It's just terracotta clay, and it comes in a bag. Once it's opened, I have to keep whatever sculpture I'm working on has to be kept wet all the way through, and the plastic bag over it sealed.
So what are some of your influences? Not necessarily in art, but in life in general?
Well, I think the big influence was my father and my mother when I was young, because being brought up in a house where everything is about art and music, has to influence a person's life. And then growing up, I'm passionate about, Michelangelo and all the early Renaissance art painters, sculptors. And I spent so much of my learning time in the museums and galleries, just sketching and that's how I learned how to do sculpture, really.
I see. So you just filling up sketchbook after sketchbook.
Completely, yeah.
Wonderful. So these live audience, these live audience kind of events that you put together for sculpture, I know that a recent one was done in your own home with a live stream and a time lapse video. It's really such a visually interesting phenomenon. It's such a visually interesting thing to watch. But where are some of the most interesting places that you've done this live sculpture at?
Well, the one we did here recently was for Countess Sophie Wessex, that was lovely, doing it at my own home in a marquee. And then, yes, I have done one at the Royal Academy. Yes, I sculpted somebody there, but always at an event where they can ask a lot of people at the large room.
You need that big audience there. Yeah. So, Francis, a lot of these 2-hour sculpture events, they're to benefit a charity or a cause. And I was wondering, what are some causes that you would like to bring more attention to?
Well, there's a couple that I think are very important at the moment. One is Mind, and that deals with the mental health of people anywhere in the world, really. But at this particular time in the pandemic, I think it's crucial to help as much as we can. I'm sure lots of people are suffering very badly. And also the homeless charities. So I'd like to focus on those two at the moment.
Well, thank you so much, Francis, for joining me. You've been
Thank you.
lovely, and you've really taught us a lot, and we look forward to seeing your next works.
Thank you. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you to all of you for joining us and watching this video. This has been Igor Piskov for New Style Magazine. Please don't forget to like and comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, and have a marvelous week ahead.